This is the Point of Struggle podcast with me, Zion, and my dad. Hi, Dad.
Hello, Zion. How are you today?
Good. How are you?
Hey, life is all right. Well, so what are we going to talk about today, kiddo?
I think it's your turn to come up with the topic.
Oh, is that how this works? I didn't think we were sharing. I thought it was all on you.
Well, no, I don't like that. It's your turn.
Okay. So the thing that's been on my mind, and Mindy sent it over. It's, do you remember that, police violence database?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was interested. I've been...
The visual one.
Yeah, the visual one. Yeah. So that's been on my mind. And yeah, I shared it out on social, Old Man Social, LinkedIn.
I shared it on New Man Social, Instagram.
Yeah. I'm sure your interactions were fine. Mine were pretty good.
I mostly just got thank yous. They were like, "Oh, this is so cool. Thanks for sharing."
So I actually had some interesting, we had interesting engagement. I'd actually like to do a deeper dive into that data set and probably will continue to take a look at it. I haven't had time necessarily today, but yeah, you can see that we had,
a decent amount of comments and things.
Yeah. There's a lot of, I think only one person is kind of taken the tactic,
They didn't like it or whatever?
Well, yeah, I mean, they're just taking, this is essentially, it sums up what they're saying, right? I can make it really simple. Don't commit criminal acts.
The whole, if you don't want to do the time, don't do the crime.
That's right. Yeah.
Which in an ideal world would be accurate, but.
That's right. Yeah.
Unfortunately, our justice system.
But outside of really that one thread, like sub-thread, the interaction was curious. Yeah. There were a lot of people who were just, and I don't mean this in a negative light, but just kind of virtue signaling, like, God bless you, or this is beautiful, or, I'm like, well, what stopped me in my tracks is I realized I don't have a good mental model of policing. I still don't. Like, I haven't done the work.
I remember I did do a research project on police brutality back in 2016, I think.
Yeah.
Not 2017.
Okay.
Like my sophomore year of high school, I think that was.
Was this part of school or speech and
it was
debate?
for that horrible English class that I had, but
okay. So it wasn't even speech.
But I wanted to pick a research assignment that I was interested in.
Yeah.
So that's probably the extent of my research, and it's a little outdated.
Yeah.
Obviously. But
well, so I think the thing that I would be interested in talking a little bit about, and it doesn't have to be the entirety of today's conversation, but like I said, I realized that when I saw that chart that said, okay, and it's this chart here, right? It says it's not about crime.
Yeah.
And you have this, police killing rates,
the website,
rank ordered from top to bottom.
We should probably just tell them. For anybody listening to this, the website where we found these charts on is called, what is it called?
Oh, yeah, mappingpoliceviolence.org.
Mappingpoliceviolence.org.
Yeah, so go take a look at that.
It's really fascinating.
Yeah, so what you have is a chart that rank orders from high to low police killing rates, right?
Yes.
Across different
it's the
geographies.
Red boxes, right?
Yeah, the red boxes. Yeah. And then you have mapped. So that is actually intentionally a slope that goes from high on the left side to low on the right side. There's nothing meaningful about that slope.
Yeah.
Only that it's stack ranked by, the average killing rate, for a variety of different cities or geographic locations in the United States. And then for each one of those cities, essentially, or geographies, it also gives you the violent crime rate for that area. And when you look at it, what's pretty abundantly clear is there's no correlation between violent crime rate and police killing rates.
There literally isn't. It's all over the board, the crime rate, but it's still has nothing to do with it.
And so their conclusion, which is not, I don't think it's terrible. I think it's right in line with what might be one's knee-jerk reaction was there's no excuse for police violence because there's no correlation here, right?
Yeah.
There's no correlation. And I'm taking, the reason it stopped me in my tracks is I realized I don't have a mental model for why there should be more police other than population. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
Like, that would be my understanding. I'd say, okay, so a city's big, so it'll have more police. A city's small.
Same with like senators and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Larger population, more people.
Yeah.
Police.
But I guess I could be, like, I would be interested to see, like, if there's a higher violent crime rate, does that attract more police? Do you see a police force growing over time because violence increases?
Yeah.
Or is violence a little more, I wouldn't say ephemeral, but like, is violence a little less rational than that? Like, does violence not behave in a market? And does that make sense what I'm saying?
Kind of.
Okay. So if we're not talking about violence and policing and that kind of bit, we would say, okay, let's go to a big city, and let's sell tasty tacos. So we're going to sell tasty tacos. And if our tacos are tasty, as promised,
Yeah.
we would expect more people to come and eat our tacos. And good job, us. Like, we've really figured out, what the people like.
Yeah.
And Taco Tuesday is awesome. And, we make enough money to support ourselves. And we're like, okay. And we would think that, like, if our tacos tasted better than everywhere else relatively nearby that made tacos, that we'd have the most tacos sold.
Yes.
Right? Because we understand that the market dynamics of most kind of free societies reward whatever stimulus, whatever input you put into the system. So if you say, hey, I'm offering better tacos, typically the market's going to find you and reward you with more sales. I don't know if crime works that way.
Yeah. You don't know. Well, you mean like if there's more crime, are there more police? And if there's more,
yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like I would think that it would behave something like a market, right? Where I would imagine there'd be more crime generally in larger cities. I might even guess that there might be more crime per capita generally in large cities, because I think crime, like most things human, is a function of interactions. Like if there's two people, there's really one interaction. If there's three people, there's actually two interactions or three interactions.
But another interesting thing is kind of with more police officers, more crimes are reported and recorded. So does it really have as much to do with the actual crime going on? Or are there almost, like, I would be curious to see, does crime go up when they have more police officers? Like when you if you brought more police officers
anything
first,
that would look like a market dynamic where you put some kind of supply in the system and demand goes up. Like
I was just fascinated, like if you took a community and you're like, oh, it's actually fairly low crime, right? Like it's a low income community, but the crime's, pretty low. But then if you brought more policing and you're like, would there be more crime, or would more crime suddenly appear because it's either being recorded or because of native interactions with police officers?
Yeah. So I think you get it here.
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm not quick to jump to any kind of conclusion is because I realized this chart stopped me in my tracks, and I had no mental model for policing. Like I could come up with, and I like even just looking at the chart, I came up with 3 different mental models for policing. One based on just pure population size, one based on population size and a function of what I would call like underlying tensions, like racial tensions, I would assume would create, that kind of thing, economic tensions, so that would be my second model. And my third model would be more like that policing may behave something like healthcare, where the users aren't actually the buyers. Does that make sense? Like the way health insurance works is typically if you have a decent job as a professional in the United States, your healthcare is provided by your employer, and they pay a big chunk of that.
Yeah.
Right? And then you pay a chunk of that, but nobody pays all of it. And then you go to the doctor, and depending on how you're insured, like in our case, we have pretty solid insurance. So we go to the doctor and they look it up and they're like, oh, there's no copay today. So somebody else is paying for it. This insurance company that both my employer and I are contributing to pays for it. and they have to talk to my insurance company, and that insurance company has to kind of haggle with the doctor, which means that the buyer, me, is not paying for it. So there's very little room for that system to improve to my specific needs.
Yeah.
It's going to improve to
super indirect.
Yeah, super indirect. And so those would be my three models. So my third model of policing is that it works kind of like that. Like there's a third party funder, the federal government, I don't know, the state government, I don't know, like that there would be other parties who were invested in growing police based on their own objectives, which weren't necessarily mine. And in either of those three cases, if one of those is true, I would expect the data to let me know, right? There's not enough data in the chart for me to answer if it's one or all three of those, or if it's one of those at a certain scale and then another at a higher or lower scale. I don't know. But anyway, so I bring this all up because, you're going through your 18th year of life and there's riots in the streets. Like the question of policing is more at the forefront than it has ever been in my lifetime. Right? So, and now this is like, I don't know if this is the baseline for you, but like, this is a benchmark for you. Like you'll go for the rest of your life going, yeah, I remember 2020, 2021 when there were riots in the streets. Like maybe it escalates and it's like, oh yeah, I remember that 4-year period where it was really bad. Like, and I'll remember that same period, and I dare say it will be the worst that hopefully it'll be the worst that either of us have seen, right? So how do you think about the question of police? I know that, it kind of goes hand in hand with Black Lives Matter, and it feels like on some level it also is part and parcel of the reaction or embracing of the Trump administration. Like all these things seem, so how do you parse this?
I mean, I feel like my feelings or opinions on police, are honestly, admittedly pretty biased. Like, growing up with you as my dad, from a little kid, I've never liked police officers. And now that's trendy to believe. And so everybody's like, Zion was always so right for never trusting police officers.
Oh, do you actually have friends who've said this?
Oh, absolutely. They're like, I've had friends who now are like, police officers cannot be trusted and they do so much wrong. I'm like, I've been saying this for years. Glad you guys are all on board now. But anyway, I've never really, even though I've had zero experiences with police officers, pretty much.
Okay, so you've never been pulled over?
I've never been pulled over. I've had things where I probably could have been pulled over. Like, and I would have been
but you've never been pulled over.
But I've never been pulled over. I've never been stopped. I mean, what can I say? I'm just a white girl, in Utah, just living my life. And the illegal things that I've done, nobody was around to see them. So it was like, no, I've never had any experience with police officers. But they kind of just fall under the category of adult authority that I don't have any faith in. Pretty much.
Zero faith, if somebody stole your bike, would you call the police or would you not call the police?
I think if it's like with things like that, I would probably call the police, right? You're like, oh, we've called the police before for stolen bikes, but I don't think I have they're mostly not a presence in my life, police officers.
Yeah.
But if you were as a whole, how do you feel about police officers? I'm like, I don't really have a lot of faith in them, and I don't think I would just trust them based on the fact that they're police officers. I would hope that they would do their job, but I wouldn't be like, oh yeah, they're gonna fix everything. And
well, so give me hard facts because
I mean, you asked what my feelings were on police officers, and my feelings are I've never really liked them.
Okay. So that's the feeling. So now I'm trying to understand, how does that feeling influence your actions? Does it? Or is it just kind of a belief that has no real implications in your life because you don't have interactions with police officers? I
don't really I think that's the biggest thing. And I thought about that, and I'm like, honestly, my opinions are arguably kind of ridiculous. They don't, I'm pretty much I know you've had negative and experiences with police officers that you've told me about. Yeah. And it's but I've never really had anything because I've never done anything that people would call the police on. And I don't look like someone people would call the police on.
Well, and it's interesting you take that away because my I guess the stories that I've told you about my interaction with police officers, I think they were somewhat negative. They were tinged with negativity, but I wasn't necessarily, I didn't experiencing anything personally negative from them, right? Like, I saw them be biased, right? And in my specific case, I was fortunate because I was 18 at the time. I was in a situation where probably, if it had been a different dynamic, I would have gone to jail.
Yeah.
But instead, the people that I was kicking the shit out of, they ended up in a police car. And that's just because they were less likable than me. Like, truly, like, somebody with a swastika, tattooed on their person, especially if you have two cops who are brown. Like, that's like, and that was the situation. Like, that's the most poignant situation in my life. And I watched that unfold and realized, these skinheads they're really unfortunate souls. Like, like they've been raised poorly with a poor understanding of goodness in the world.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're young kids. I
wouldn't be like, oh, these people are just inherently evil.
Yeah, these are like my fellow concert goers.
Yeah.
Who knows? Like, maybe one of them was 20, but they were kids.
Still young.
Just like me, right? Yeah. And it's like, how do you get to a point in your young life where you've embraced something so toxic?
Yeah.
And I was around gangbangers as well, which I felt similarly about. Like, how in your 16 years of life have you managed to, like, find the worst of humanity?
Exactly.
And get in bed with that. And like, that frames your existence. I'm like, it doesn't bode well for you.
It doesn't.
And so it's like, like, that was a situation where it's like, could have gone south, but the police officers fortunately disliked skinheads like most people do.
Yeah.
I've been in others, like, before my 19th birthday, I think I'd been pulled over 18 times for speeding.
Yeah.
Never once got a ticket in those, 18, 19 years. Again, I say this because it's like, I don't know. They're not great stories. Like, hey, your dad was kind of a.
Yeah.
He wasn't the best human. He wasn't bad.
I'm not saying my childhood rationale was based in reality, but I have I have memories of, like, I've just always been like, police, not a huge fan, but, like, that falls under, like, I don't like guns and I don't like violence of any, like, this about me, like, I'm a very not violent person, right, and so it's like, most things that would fall under that, I'm like, don't like it. Yeah. I think people should not have the power to harm people. Like, I don't even like hunting. No, I get that. Yeah. No, so this is good. So then my question would be, like, what is what would be in your mind a worthy goal? Like, do you find resonance in this idea of, like, defund the police and get rid of police departments? I think, like, the defund the police, like, the actual meaning behind it, it's kind of been twisted, obviously, as everything is. It's like, oh, so you just want to, like, get rid of police officers altogether.
Well, I think there's an extreme component.
There's obviously an extreme version of everything. But I think the idea of having less on police officers' plate would actually be a benefit for lots of people. Because I'm trying to remember cause I've seen a bunch of different kind of, like, breakdowns, right? Like, visuals, but, like, they are responsible for a lot of different things. Like, police officers are. And I feel like we talked about this. Like, giving them less to do, I think would be beneficial. And I'm not honestly super informed on the current, like, statistics and, like, all of their jobs. Cause I just haven't bothered to look into it. I've researched some police brutality and kind of, like, the reasoning behind why that happens, but that's about it. Yeah. I feel like a worthy goal, like, I don't think getting rid of police altogether, like, I don't think that's the correct move. Like, it'd be great if we lived in a world where we never needed police officers or anybody to kind of, like, deal with situations. But I feel like a worthy goal with police officers is, I think if they were primarily just de-escalators of situations, I think that could be really valuable. Because sometimes there are cases where we need some sort of authority to step in with, like, disputes between other citizens, right? Like,
Well,
things like
domestic situations are one of those things where, I don't know, there's like this fuzzy version of life where, there's a domestic dispute and we dispatch a social worker, kind-hearted soul that just like tries to walk them, walk them both off the ledge. But, so.
And so I almost feel like more like, a service to a public.
But what if things escalate? Do you really want a social worker there? Or then do you want just a cop with a.
It is just, in my opinion, it is a fact that they are not trained enough in de-escalation training, like at all. Like back in 2016 or 2017, or 2016, and usually they get around 8 hours of de-escalation training, if any. You actually, in some states, you aren't even required to have it.
Okay.
Compared to the 100 plus hours of firearm training.
Yeah, yeah.
And like that right there, you're like, oh, so they really are spending a lot of time with guns, which I personally would be like, maybe we don't want that to be something they have the most experience and are most comfortable in doing.
Yeah.
Right? You're like, why would if I was a police officer, my first thing wouldn't be like, I'm going to try this one thing that I barely practice to kind of deal with this situation, right?
Well, and it goes a little further because,
obviously that's
the thought amongst police that I've heard from, the couple officers that I've had a longer conversation with, So I've asked specifically about the question of, when you use your gun to stop somebody, like what is the frame of mind, or what is the, objective? And, in both cases, they gave a very similar answer, which I think is a pretty common answer. When you draw that gun, that person doesn't get up. Right? So you shoot until they're stopped. Like, probably dead. Like, dead is,
that's usually what
dead stopped. It doesn't matter. But like, you shoot until they are no longer moving. Because it's because you're trained to think, believe, act upon this self-protection idea, right? Mm-hmm. That like things have just escalated, and so you're going to shoot until the person is stopped.
But it's almost kind of you saying that almost makes it feel like it's at a too late now, narrative a little bit.
It is. So pulling a gun on somebody exists on a barbell spectrum, which is stop. And if they don't stop, whatever stop means, stop moving, stop running away, stop reaching and, fiddling with your pockets, stop, just freeze.
Yeah.
Freeze, we're going to approach you. And if you move, you haven't stopped. So if you don't stop, we will stop you with this firearm.
Yeah.
Right. You will be stopped. And that's probably a simple rule. It seems pretty simple to me. But I think you're right in that maybe that's not a worthy rule for a time when our goal would probably be to stop crime, but not necessarily kill criminals, right?
No, ideally I'd be I don't think we should be killing anybody. We should not be killing people. That's I remember I saw this tweet and it's police officers, whether or not they committed a crime, they don't get to play judge, jury, and executioner at the end of every crime. I think it's,
I don't think they're that thoughtful though. I think that's what's part of it.
I don't think it's that thoughtful either, but I think that's a good thing. It's I don't think that should be a responsibility of theirs, and that's just a lot of power to give someone.
Yeah.
And the ability, and I think the big thing is.
So let's just I'm curious because, I get it. I feel like you're bathed in the current milieu of feelings about the police, and I don't think that's bad. I don't think what your generation is saying about police, is just categorically wrong.
No.
But I'm curious to unpack it.
No, I'm completely open to that.
Yeah, so...
And I, fully accept that I'm sure there's things that I just have frankly just not thought that much about.
Yeah.
And aren't very well thought out.
let's do, so the statistics that I've been able, the numbers that I've been able to come up with, and most of this comes from a conversation I listened to, with an author of a recent book. I can't remember what the name of the book is, but let's see if we can find it here. Because I think I mentioned it somewhere in here. Let's see.
Book.
Let's see.
If we can't find it,
Yeah, we can probably
link
follow
it in the
up.
description.
Yeah, but yeah. So in this book, the author was citing essentially that we've got something like 1,000 to 1,200 criminal or suspect deaths a year at the hands of like 650,000 police officers.
Yeah.
Right. So it doesn't happen per officer very often, right?
Yeah.
Like people don't die all the time, but that's 1,000 to 1,200 people a year who die, at the hands of our police officers. And on the other side of that equation, there's like about 50 officers a year who die, in the line of duty, doing their job. It seems reasonable, like as a citizen, it seems reasonable to want both of those numbers to be smaller.
Yes.
Right? Like, this is like, I'm not an extremist. Like, I don't feel like, well, if innocent people die, but we get more criminals off the street, it's a worthy sacrifice. I don't feel that way. And I also don't feel like, oh, these officers are such scumbags that like, if 50 die, that's a drop in the bucket. Like, no, that's like, I would like both of those numbers to be reduced.
Yes. Agreed.
So I'm more interested on the police officer side, mostly because I think it gets to the heart of the matter of like, what is the proper role of policing? Mm-hmm. So we have about 60 million handguns in the U.S.
Yeah.
And a lot of those handguns are held by law-abiding citizens who are just, gun aficionados, or they have some interest in the gun. Mm-hmm. An unfortunate percentage of those guns are in the hands of criminals who will use them to prosecute crime.
Yeah.
And those 50 officers, like 97% of them died from a gun.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's how officers die. Mm-hmm. Another criminal shoots them, right? Mm-hmm. So that part of it is a shooting war, as it were. Yeah. Like, it's not like, oh yeah, of those 50 officers who die, like, 25% die because somebody had a gun, and 25% die because they got hit by a car, and 25% die because, they got into a knife fight, hand-to-hand combat, and then another 25 die just randomly, pianos being dropped on them in a, like a cartoonish fashion. No, like it's 97-ish% of those 50 people. Like, so maybe 1 or 2 out of 50 die of something else. Yeah. But really, officers die in the line of duty because there's 60. Because essentially there's 60 million handguns in the U.S. and some percentage of them are used to do crime. We're never going to get that number 50 down with 60 million handguns. Yeah. Like, how do you feel about that part of the equation? Like, do you agree that that's true? Like, we could never say, oh, we're going to just like get that number to 0 by, I don't know, putting more armor on our officers. Like, no, there's going to be officers who die because handguns are a thing.
Giving police officers more weapons or giving them more armor or militarizing them, if you will, I don't think that's going to make it go down. And I know the gun issue is a complicated problem, and that if you're like, we should just get rid of all the guns, like that's not going to happen. Like it or not, Americans are very attached to their guns, and I don't think we should just remove the right to arms. But yeah, I think it would require less firearms available, I guess. I don't know that much about it, but
so that's one thing. So that's kind of your thought.
To kind of do this, because it's like, for me, it's like, I don't want to have a gun. I don't want guns in my life. I don't like them. Yeah. And I'm not comfortable around them. And so it's like, for me, I'd be like, I would just be like, no guns. You guys shouldn't have guns. But that's not a good, like, I don't think that's realistic.
That's not how America works,
not realistic,
right?
And that's exactly.
Well, so then the other part of this that it would be interesting to hear you struggle with is like, do you agree with some version of the kind of personal firearm enthusiast belief that like at some level a citizen with a gun has the ability to stop tyranny. Like, that's the extreme version of it. It's
Yeah.
like literally like, so at some point in time, almost all countries turn their military on their citizens. Like, it's just, and frankly, that's like a true observation about history. Like, at some point, the guns go inward, cause there's unrest or whatever, or you've got a dictator who wants to take your stuff. Do you believe that? Do you think that's probably misplaced?
I think that's a fair observation, and I can understand the rationale behind that.
Okay.
And I do genuinely, like, I think other people should be allowed to own guns.
Okay.
I think my thing with guns is I would say that it's too easy to get guns, and I think it should be more difficult to acquire a gun, right? Like, all of the memes and the jokes. You're like, oh, you can't buy that much of this medicine. Fine, I'll just get 1 box and these 7 guns, please.
Yeah.
Right? And they're like, oh, yeah, that's fine. We can sell you these 7 guns at our Walmart.
Yeah.
And so, like, I think that's ridiculous, and I don't think guns should be that easily accessible. And I, frankly, as someone who suffers from mental illness, I don't think people who have been diagnosed as, like, mentally ill should be allowed to have guns. Like, I don't think I should be allowed to. Like, I am a pretty stable person, but I'm like, I don't think you should give me a gun. Like,
yeah.
I could fall apart. I really could. And so I don't think I would ever shoot anybody. But I don't think I would even shoot somebody if they were trying to shoot me. Maybe.
Yeah.
But I'd be like, I guess this is the day I go.
Yeah.
But just like, I think my thing with a lot of guns is like, I think it should be extremely difficult to acquire one. Not impossible.
Okay.
But it'd be like,
be harder to get them. Yeah.
Really hard. Lots
Yeah,
of
so the
forms.
supply side should be lower, right?
Supply side should be lower. It should be like, you should have to ask for a gun or like sign up to get a gun. It's like, it's going to take you like 3 months to get this gun. So hopefully that's okay.
Yeah. And you're not going to get much from me on my end because, I mean, I don't know that people are that interested in my beliefs. Like, I don't even know that you're that interested in my beliefs. But I'm very interested in like how your beliefs are being shaped with the goings on of today, right? Okay. So one part of your suggestion on lowering the number of officers who die, would be to reduce the supply of guns, right?
Yes.
Okay. Either reduce the amount that are produced or just that the supply is harder to get to. And so, it
and
selects.
I understand that there's always the argument. You're like, well, if people have less guns, then there's people who do illegal things will have more guns. But I think
sure, yeah.
But I also think it's kind of ridiculous to say that you're like, having less guns in rotation, right? Like in the market wouldn't affect the amount of criminals who have guns at all. Like I think it would. Like I think it would be.
I would think so.
I would think it seems ridiculous to be like, no,
it'll be interesting to kind of figure out. Because again, another thing that I'm interested in looking at with this data set is, trying to examine if market dynamics are in play, right? Like with criminals' access to guns, I would expect that in larger markets, more criminals would have guns because there would be a larger market, right? Just like 20 years ago when I moved here to Provo, there was no good food. Like literally, there was terrible, terrible food here. The population has grown, and a few very successful companies sold or were turned into cash, which created more millionaires. Blah blah blah. Fast forward 20 years, we have really quite good food here.
We really do.
Yeah, but that's more recent.
And also, thank goodness for non-white people moving here too.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
delicious
and
food.
if you want the greatest food, go to New York. Most people like, like that's what I'm saying. Like, I want to see if market dynamics are at play. It's like you would expect the normal, parts of markets behaving indiscriminate to what the supply is. Like, is it crime? Is it guns? Is it good food?
Yeah.
You would expect those things to all work a little bit in lockstep. And if it doesn't have a market dynamic, then I'm curious to understand what could explain the underlying departure from this kind of null hypothesis. The guns, guns are a market commodity. Okay, so let's say magically, we wave a magic wand and there are fewer guns. What do you think about police behavior? For instance, I don't know this, but I'm curious to find out. How many police officers are shot breaking into a building? Now, granted, they have the legal right to do so. Maybe they have a search warrant or whatever.
Yeah.
But like, how many officers are, maybe even armored and armed to the teeth, but like, they're literally walking into a trap, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a very high tension situation where, on one side of the door, you have, I don't know, half dozen officers who are going to storm a residence or a building. And on the other side of the door, you have, known or suspect criminals, who have just been surprised by police officers. Like, that seems like that's when a lot of things would go south, right?
Yeah.
Like
high tension, lots of arms.
Yeah, close
right?
confines. Like,
close confines,
seems like
yeah.
a bad situation.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it seems like a lethal situation. Like, somebody's going to die in those situations. I don't know. Like, I don't have enough friends who are officers or connections to explore that anecdotally, but I'm going to look at it in the data. Do you think that, like, generally speaking, because a lot of those are like war on drugs type things.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about like drugs and that kind of bet?
With drugs, I think most of them should be at least significantly more legal than they are. And I know drugs make people uncomfortable and that addiction is a sad thing.
Yeah.
But addiction is also, like, the issues that addiction cause are first, the person who's addicted to it. And second, like, close friends and family often. They're like, it's really sad.
Those are the ones who pay the biggest price.
They pay the biggest price because, like, it's really sad when someone you care about is afflicted with such a horrible disease, right? That's debilitating them and robbing them of their quality and happiness, like quality of life.
Well, and changing their personality,
and
frankly.
Changing their personality.
Right? Like, they become
like
thieves.
It feels like a slow death for them a lot of the time. Which is really sad. Like, it can be devastating. And I don't want to dismiss the fact that that is true, but that's not a lot, like, but that's not actually, like, the only person addiction often would kill people would be the person who's addicted to the drug, which is sad. But because so many are illegal, you've got these whole markets with, like, dangerous criminals, right? Who are like, we're selling drugs and we can make a lot of money and we're gonna kill people because we can, because we're in a big, it's not like a mafia, but like, it's an organized type crime thing. And I think that I don't know a ton about it, right?
Well, does it feel like the slippery slope argument is probably in play in something that has become so illegal?
Yeah.
Right? And when I say slippery, it's like you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound. Mm-hmm. Like, if you're illegally selling DVDs, it turns out that market is so well policed and the fines are so enormous, and I don't know what else is going on, but I actually think also you can get, not also, like, probably the primary thing going is that, like, you can buy these things legally really easily. Like, if you want a copy of a movie, a DVD, or, I guess you're old and you want a classic CD.
I think it's like,
you just go get those, right?
I mean, first off, with, like, pot, like, I think that should, like, people should be able to buy that.
So like, what I'm saying is the illegal sale of movies, bootleg movies, is not sold, protected, or enforced on the other side at gunpoint. Like, this is not a violent world of bootleg DVDs. No, it's a dumb world. Like, there's some,
No, but they've made it so it's really just not worth the risk most of the time.
It's right, because frankly, you can go get a copy of this movie on 3 different streaming services for not very much money.
You're like, under $20.
Yeah, and so unless the bootleg copy is free, and if the bootleg copy is free and you can get it free and clear, like no one knows you got it, then we see probably a whole bunch of IP theft. Yeah. But we don't see a lot of that because it's hard. Like,
it's an inconvenient thing to do.
Yeah, like, we're actually at the point in time where, like, 12 years ago, Mindy and I were using, we were getting bootleg copies of stuff off the internet. Because that was like the only place you could get it. You had to go that, or you had to go literally go buy a DVD.
You gotta go to Blockbuster and you gotta rent it or buy it.
And we didn't have live TV. Like we were early unpluggers. Right? Like, so there's all these market dynamics. And we've got a couple.
So it was about the same level of convenience or inconvenience, and one was free.
Yeah, and one was free.
But now it's like, we've got so many streaming services.
No, now it's literally a pain to fire up.
It's an absolute pain in the ass to try to do anything else.
Yeah. It's like, no. Like I literally open 1 of 3 apps and click one or 2 buttons and we're watching a movie together. And that was easy. Like,
exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So it would be the analogous argument that if you could get, some of these drugs with little effort, that like the violence surrounding them would go down.
It's a little bit more expensive and you got to do a few more things, but you're like, you're like, oh man, I could go get this drug illegally, but I could like also maybe die doing that. Like, who knows if my whatever is laced with something.
Oh yeah, well, and like people are dying right now because their heroin's laced with fentanyl to cut it.
Or they'll just shoot me or something because they're drug dealers.
Yeah.
And so you're like, I think if we made it more legal and you're like, like it's not like a free market, like everybody's selling cocaine out of the back of their house and like it's legal, free cocaine, and everybody can just like that. I don't want that, right? I don't think it should be like chewing gum that we're handing it out to people. But I think but I think I think most drugs should be on some level legal to buy.
Legal or decriminalized.
Legal or decriminalized.
Yeah.
Because I think that would make people safer and people would be like, oh man, it's going to be kind of a pain to like feed my drug addiction, right? Because it's always going to be a pain. But there's a way that would be less likely to just be murdered.
Right.
And
that the supply chains would not be protected.
Yeah, and also police officers would spend less than their tons of time, like they spend tons of time breaking up drugs, like a lot. I remember researching that, and it was like that was like the primary thing that it, and a lot of it was pot. Like it was, you're like, oh, marijuana.
So not even drugs that like in your own household, that like pot's not that big a deal.
Yeah, and so you're like marijuana. It's like literally they're killing people over the fact that they're selling marijuana.
Yeah.
And they're still doing, like, they do that. You're like, they pull people over. Like, it kind of smells like marijuana. Oops. You guys are dead now. And we were supposed to be just giving you a speeding ticket.
Yeah.
So I feel like removing that even as an option for them to be like, maybe
okay,
they have drugs.
So we somehow de-escalate on the war on drugs. Mm-hmm. And so now people aren't breaking into homes. They're not surprising people in their homes. Which again, it's my I think that's my first bias. It feels like that would, cause I just don't think that there's a lot of shoot 'em outs, cops and robbers, like on an open freeway or open street. And they're just,
you have your car
unloading, on each other. Like, I don't think that happens very often. I think if shots are fired, they're probably in a closed off confines, which means that the cops were trying to get in by surprise or by force, definitely by force, and sometimes by surprise. And my mind immediately goes like, and what's in the building that's like, I don't know, like how often are cops like breaking up human trafficking rings? Like, I would hope they do sometimes, but like that's probably not the bulk of why they're breaking into buildings. They're probably breaking into buildings to stop somebody from selling drugs, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So you're kind of with me that feels like a reasonable approach. Yeah. Or that would be kind of where your head goes. So is there anything else that you can think of to kind of reduce that number? So you addressed handguns and guns in general. We talked through drugs. What else is going on that you think about?
Like, that could be causing police officer deaths or whatever?
Yeah, maybe those are like the two easiest.
I feel like those are honestly the two I can think of.
Okay, so then on the other side, how do we reduce the number of people who die at the hands of cops? I
honestly and genuinely think that lies in better de-escalation training with police officers. And I really do think police officers, like, ideally I'd be like, I think they should be responsible for helping solve more violent disputes between citizens. And
Yeah.
being like, these people, because people do that, right?
So of those like 11 or 1,200 people who die, there's at least one officer involved, probably more than one, right? Like at least one officer involved in every one of those deaths. By definition, maybe there's a team of officers, a squad car, right? Like I don't know how. Again, I'm really curious to understand like what situations arise where somebody dies. Like is it on the side of a freeway? Is it inside a house? Is it in a building? Like is it just in an alley somewhere? Is it like in the open street? Like I don't know. Like my imagination runs wild, and
because you've got these like you've got these like rare situations like, oh, it was just a little kid with a fake gun.
Yeah, in a park.
Yeah, there was a woman sleeping in her bed, and
so you hear the corner cases, but
corner cases, but you're like,
but that explains 12 out of 1,200. Like
and so just like,
so how do people die? And I don't know. I don't have the answer.
And I'm guessing a lot of them are kind of like something violent was going on. Police officer came, and then it got even more heated, and
but so when it comes to de-escalation, I feel like your previous recommendations kind of go lockstep with de-escalation. Like, for instance, if you knew there weren't as many handguns, or you could see that handguns were reducing, and frankly, I'd be curious to know, like, and if you also knew that only handguns are why cops die, like, right, because I can't believe that those 1,000 to 1,200 people who die, that they all had a gun in their hand. I know that's not true. Like, because usually when they don't, it gets reported, right? Mm-hmm. So I know that at least some meaningful percentage of those people, aren't brandishing a weapon of any kind. And when you hear like, this most recent tale, like, well, he had a knife. It's like, well, on him, or was it like in his car?
He was reaching for a knife. Allegedly, there was a knife in his car, and he was reaching for it.
Yeah.
And then he gets shot 7 times in the back.
Yeah, but so 2 things, right, to de-escalate. The 2 things that I would offer to de-escalate in that situation is, one, if the officer understood that, and I'm pulling this out of my ass, but I'll go play with the data and see what I find. If the officers knew that in the last 10 years, not a single officer died at the other end of a blade, then a blade is not actually, like, it's not actually a weapon.
It's not
like
that,
it is a
like,
weapon.
It's not that unlikely,
but it's not a weapon that put
stab.
Yeah, well, but like they haven't even been stabbed, right? Well, because officers literally have guns. Like it's like don't bring a knife to a gunfight.
Exactly.
Right? That's like and so you'd say, okay, well, yeah. So he's reached for a knife. That's fine. We've now taught our officers that like officers don't die at the other end of a blade. They just don't. And the officers are like, well, they could. You're like, could theoretically, but one hasn't. Like in recent memory, and it's because we wear body armor, because we teach you to disengage, and because you have other officers who have literally have a gun trained on the individual. So it's like, so you're not going to die. If you're not going to die, don't shoot. Right? That seems reasonable. Like, I know they had a blade or a box cutter or a knife or a machete or something. It's like, yeah, but you're not going to die. You're not even going to get injured. So don't shoot. I wonder how many of those there are where it's like they were unarmed or they were actually not armed lethally.
Yeah. I wondered too. Cause that's something I've even thought about is it's just like I would say that's not a worthy reason to kill someone, right? Like just you said, you're not the risk isn't equal, Yeah. And along with guns, it's like, people are like, well, they have a gun, like they're just going to kill us. And you're like, maybe, but I think that leaves the complication of like, well, when they do have a gun, right? Like, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
And I think here's the case though, is I know in movies, people are like, they get shot and they somehow, like, they just keep going, like, brush it off. They're shot in the thigh. They're running around fine, essentially. Their face is kind of grimaced. You're like, that's not how it is in real life. Like, getting shot, from what I've heard, like, is pretty, like, it hurts a lot. It usually stops people pretty well, or kind of incapacitates them in some way. And that's like one shot, right?
Yeah.
Like, the idea, and I think it's another issue, is like, the idea you're going to shoot them until they've stopped. And you're like, I feel like you'd be like, you shoot them once, and now they're like, oh shit, I can't really come chase after you. My aim's probably going to be off. Police officer.
Yeah. So I would first want to just, like, I want to deal with the handgun armed criminal after dealing with everybody else.
Yeah.
Like my personal thought is like
I want to do with that and see how much it goes down.
Yeah, like if I get rid of all these people who were brandishing a blade at some level, or who were just threatening, like by yelling mean things, if we say, you know what, that's no longer a reason to shoot somebody. It doesn't matter. Well, they came running at me with a sword. You're like, well, you're not going to die. Like, it's just not going to happen. And so then at that point you say, taser, gun, whatever, one shot. If the person goes down, like, that's enough.
Yeah.
Like, you don't actually have to finish them off, right?
No. Like,
and again, like, this is just me trying to come up with a heuristic.
Like, they drop and they start to get back up. Like, that's enough time for you to get out of the way. Like, for you to, like, remove yourself.
Yeah. And I would agree this requires a lot of training. Like,
right, this does require a lot of training.
But probably not necessarily more than they're receiving, just different kinds.
Just different training on different things.
Yeah. Because, part of me thinks it's like, well, how many people die with one gunshot? I don't know. Like, if it's to the head, probably a big percentage. Not 100, but, like, I don't know, 80% of people die if you get shot in the head. But what if you don't get shot in the head? I think most officers are trained to shoot the body, because, like, that's the biggest target. It's like, how many body shots are lethal? Like, I don't know, some percentage. But if you get shot once, maybe, I don't know, maybe a third of the people die. Maybe a quarter of the people die. But you've just erased, 60 to 75% of those deaths.
But I think with all that, it's like,
do you have to unload your clip on somebody? Like, because they're going to die if you do that. Like,
they're going to die. People aren't that resilient. And I would feel like, I honestly think in pretty much every single case, shooting a person once, not in the head, right? Like, not trying to kill them, but like incapacitating them, right? You even shoot them in the leg, right? You shoot them in the leg, you shoot them in the arm. You shoot them in the arm, they're trying to shoot you with the gun.
And I guess what I'm not saying is I don't think officers should be trained to try and shoot people, like kneecap people.
No.
That's not a very high percentage shot, right? Like, you can't be that accurate. But you don't necessarily have to go, well, I shot him once in the torso and then I unloaded my clip into the rest of him.
Exactly.
And now he's definitely stopped. You're like, yes, you're right. 15 shots, like, definitely not moving now.
Dead people don't move.
That's right. But one might have been enough. Like, and even if they're still yelling and they're like, oh, and they're irascible. But, like, if they're not armed or if they've been disarmed, you don't have to shoot them again because they're not armed. Like, you're just like, no, they can throw a fit. They can be angry. Like,
well, then you get the cases of people who are, like, literally running away from you and you shot them in the back. Like, there's no reason for that.
You don't need to gun somebody down who's running away. Like,
you don't.
Like, you know who they are. You'll go get them later. Like,
exactly. And, like, we still have tasers. Like, how close are they? Like, I feel like there's so many options. We have, like, we really do need different training. And I also think we need motivation to not shoot people. And I think one thing is, like, and not kill people, right? Because we see it and you're like, it's actually, like, police officers can get away with killing people unreasonably. Like, they can. Like, they absolutely can and do get away with it. And I think it'd be important to create a precedent of, like, no, if you shoot someone, we're like, oh, there was literally no reason for you to do that. Like, you're gonna go to jail. Like, that's what's gonna happen. Because we can't just have, like, police officers are...
So there'd be the last kind of recommendation.
Like, last kind of recommendation is, like, make a precedent of police officers going to jail for murdering people.
Yeah. Well, and then the system also being punished, right?
The system being punished, right? Like, it's a whole thing. You're like, and so if you're a police officer and you're going into a situation...
So to me, that sounds like kind of introducing or reintroducing market dynamics
Exactly.
to being
but
a
also,
police
like,
officer.
having the precedent of that, but not just being like, oh, suddenly, like, you're definitely going to go to jail, but also giving them the training and tools to be like the other options. So they don't have to go to jail. They don't have to kill someone. Nobody has to die, right? All of that. You're like, we're going to train you other options besides killing someone. And we're also going to severely, like, not severely, but like punish you as anyone would be punished for killing someone without reasonable, like, reason, right? Unreasonably taking someone's life. And I think that would be pretty much all of my recommendations. Yeah, for police officers to stop killing so many people.
Well, those are good. It's been an interesting conversation to kind of navigate this space with you. I've appreciated your thoughtful answers, and it's something I'm going to continue to think about pretty extensively. Anything else you want to cover today?
Honestly, I don't think so. I think that was a good discussion. And I think I even realized some of the opinions I hadn't even thought about certain things like this. I don't know. I think it's really easy to just, like, ending thoughts. I think it's really easy to be beaten down and, like, get really discouraged with things like that. This, right? Like, it's really sad to know the people who are supposedly, we're told, are supposed to be protecting us and keeping the peace aren't doing that too often. Like, not like they're never doing that, but like too much of the time, they're not doing that, I would argue. But I think there are real solutions, and I think, well, sometimes misplaced and not as well thought out as could be, my generation's new, like, dislike with police officers, but also just authority in general. While not always perfect, I think there is value behind it, and I'm usually for calling into question a lot of just the systems that we have. You're like, I think any questioning of something is often ends up being at least somewhat useful. She's like, oh, we actually never had to think about this really. And it's good that there's a lot of people who are like, maybe imperfectly, but being like, we should think more about this and we should change and we should find out a new solution or at least try something different because we've been doing the same thing for too long. So I think it's valuable, even if done imperfectly, to call into question a lot of the systems that we've had in place for a long time. But yeah, this was a good discussion. I hope everybody listening has a great rest of your day. Talk to you next week.